I'd like to just first of all welcome everyone to this very special evening that we've called Master of Imaginative Synthesis, Federico Fellini at 100. And this live webinar is in conjunction with the 2020 publication of Wiley Blackwell's A Companion to Federico Fellini. And I'd like to introduce Valerio Rumori, the director of the Italian Cultural Institute of Los Angeles, to officially kick things off.
Thank you so much, Alex. So we're kicking in for the very first event of this year's very important celebration of the great maestro for the centennial. And this is, thank you, Alex, for introducing for me also, what we're going to do today. So it's in conjunction with the 2020 publication of the book. And this webinar is part of the official celebrations for the great maestro organized throughout 2020 by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation all over the world. And the Institute in Los Angeles will present, so this is the very first of a series. We'll have webinars, book presentations, exhibitions, and much more. So please stay tuned to our future events. We're very happy and very fortunate to have Professor Alessandro Ago with us, Director of Programming and Special Projects at USC School of Cinematic Arts, as a moderator for this fascinating conversation about the great filmmaker. With Frank Burke, Professor Emeritus, Department of Film and Media, Queen's University, Canada, Thomas Harris, Professor, UCLA Department of Italian, and Federico Pacchioni, the Sebastian, Paul, and Marybelle Musco Chair in Italian at Chapman University. This event is also held in memory of Marguerite Waller, Professor Emerita of Comparative Literature and Gender Studies at the University of California, Riverside, and co-editor of the companion to Federico Fellini book. I would sincerely like to extend my gratitude to all of these evening participants and recognize in particular Marguerite Waller for her invaluable collaboration in this event. Alessandro Ago is the Director of Programming and Special Projects at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, where he hosts film screenings, festivals, guest speakers, and special events. He also curates Outside the Box Office, a prolific and diverse screening series dedicated to showcasing new international documentary and independent cinema at USC, often followed by conversations with the filmmakers. With a special interest in Italian cinema, Alex Ago has hosted events with Roberto Saviano, Mario Monicelli, Lina Wertmueller, Gabriele Salvatores, Claudia Cardinale, Marco Bellocchio, Dario Argento, just to name a few. So thank you. Now, without any further ado, let's welcome Professor Alessandro Ago. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see in the chat that one of our guests would like to see all of us momentarily. I do want to also mention how shockingly unexpected it was to learn that Marguerite Waller passed away this year. She was really the life force behind this event, and I really have heard from so many friends of hers in the past couple of weeks leading up to this, expressing obviously the great sadness, but also the anticipation of being able to participate in something that she cared very much about. So I know that there are a lot of Margie's friends out there, and I really thank you for joining us tonight. And of course, the most appropriate person to really pay tribute to Margie and her work is Frank Burke, Professor Emeritus at Queen's University, where from 1987 to 2015, he taught film in relation to postmodernity, ideological criticism, cultural studies, post-structuralist theory, and gender. His research has been devoted to Italian, North American, and Italian-American cinema with a frequent focus on Federico Fellini. He's published 5 books on Fellini's films in English and contributed to Italian volumes on the director as well. His Wiley Blackwell's A Companion to Federico Fellini, which he edited with the late Marguerite Waller and with Marita Gubareva, has just been published, as has his Fellini's Films and Commercials, From Post-War to Postmodern. I'm going to let Frank take it from here, but I do want to say that we're going to have some presentations from our panelists, and then we will open things up to take questions from the audience. So if at any point you'd like to give us a question, you can use the Q&A box on your Zoom window, and we'll call on you when the time comes. So Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you, Valeria and Istituto Italiano di Cultura, and for Tom and Federico for participating in this panel, and all the many people who are here this evening. This is the first major presentation of the book. I had scheduled several in Italy, but they were all canceled, of course. But none of them would have attracted the 600 or so registrants that have apparently signed up for this, so I am numerically overjoyed. As Alex and Valeria mentioned, this event is dedicated to the memory of Marguerite Waller, or Margie, as she was known to many and to many who are here this evening. Margie's death was and continues to be a terrible shock. As numerous tributes on the internet make clear, she was a peerless scholar, teacher, mentor, and friend. I won't cover the same ground here as the tributes because they're available for all to see, but I will talk about her relationship to this book. To paraphrase Bob Marley, no Margie, no book. I had edited the Wiley Companion to Italian Cinema, and so I was familiar with Companion series and also with the Film Director series. And back in 2017, looking forward to the centenary, it seemed to be logical to do a book on Fellini, but having done the Italian Cinema book myself, I knew I couldn't take on a project of that magnitude again. So it all depended on Margie, with whom I'd co-edited a book in 2002 on Fellini. I knew her as a fabulous thinker, writer, editor, and collaborator, and we shared very much the same attitudes toward Fellini. And of course, Margie exponentially elevated any project on which she collaborated. We also had a third grade editor, Maria Gubareva, who lives in Rome and provided invaluable material from Italy and from her native Russia. But Margie was a deal clincher. I wouldn't have done it without her. And when she said yes, the book was destined to appear. Will now always carry with it for me the sadness of her loss, but also the pleasure and good fortune of having had her as a Fellini companion in the preparation of this companion. On a lighter note, one of the great treasures of my work with Margie was this Borsellino hat, which she sent to me during the preparation of the book. I can't quite carry it off the way Fellini, young Fellini, or Guido did in 8½, but it's fun trying. So thank you, Margie, for everything. Turning to the companion, I'd like to say a few words about format. The book was really conceived by us in a print version. And one of the things we had in mind was to fill as much as possible blank pages that normally appear between sections and chapters of the book. So we accumulated a lot of testimonials, and is this clear? Can people see very clearly? So that on the left side here, we have at the very beginning of the introduction, a wonderful testimonial by Catherine Breda. And we tried as much as possible. We figured there are no blank spaces in Fellini's film, so why should we have any in our book? But of course, it was impossible with the publisher to get that many testimonials published. But at any rate, the idea was to be able to have pages side by side that had that kind of design effect. And also to be able to play a bit with Fellini's illustrations so that at the end of the book, the final page of the book is a self-portrait of Fellini waving goodbye. So we played around with this, and the problem is in the ebook versions, there's a Kindle version and there's a Wiley version, you can only go page by page. As far as I can tell, you can't look at things side by side. You can only go page by page. So I just wanted to say that my preference certainly is for the print version of the book. Wiley books are very expensive because they're geared toward a library market, but Wiley has given us a 50% discount on the book until the end of the centenary year. And though I don't expect very many people to be running out and buying this book, I just thought I would say the best price for the print version is on Amazon, and the best price for the ebook is on Wiley. Aims and contents. We truly conceived of the book as a companion. We asked ourselves more or less, if one were stranded on a desert island with a Blu-ray player inexhaustible battery power in all Fellini's films, what would one want as a companion to his work? And we weren't thinking principally of academics, but of the general cinephile as well. So the volume is meant to be jargon-free, even though there are essays that deal with significant theoretical issues. We aim to cover all the basics of his career, his pre-cinematic work as a cartoonist, satirical journalist, and gag writer for variety theater, his work in neorealism as a screenwriter for Roberto Rossellini, and his screenwriting on genre films, American-style genre films by Pietro Germi. The book illustrates his grounding not just in the origins of the art film, which Italian neorealism was to a large extent within Italy, but even more so in popular culture. And I thought here we would show a drawing that Fellini did out of his great respect and love for Disney. So is that, will I see that as it shows up? Whoop, you're muted. I think you're muted.
Sorry, can you give me the specific number?
Oh, yeah, it'd be the first, number one.
Number one.
Yeah. And if this gets too difficult, we can do without the illustration.
No, I'll just have to, I have a lot of windows open. So here we go. We're going to take a look at the first slide.
Okay. Okay, so this was an image. Fellini loved Disney as a cartoonist, of course, and Disney loved Fellini. And they met in Los Angeles when Fellini came to LA to accept the Oscar for La Strada. And he did other sketches like this, but this was probably the most striking sketch that he did, which is a combination of Disney and La Strada with Gelsomina in the middle. So thank you very much. The book also covers principal themes in iconography: the circus, the sea, the empty square, the church, fascism, marginal and non-normative characters, Fellini's use of music and sound, his collaborators, his issue with producers, his relationship to the world of fashion, and his critical reputation. And here, I think the second image is an image of Fellini and Nina Rota, which is, again, partly what I'm trying to do is illustrate what a wonderful sketch artist Fellini was, but also this illustrates the extraordinary relationship that he had with Nina Rota, who wrote all the music to his feature films from The White Sheik through orchestra rehearsal until Nina Rota's death. So thanks. Thank you, Alex. In terms of Fellini's later non-cinematic work, there's ample discussion of his Book of Dreams, which are sketches and annotations of his dreams from 1960 to 1990, which were published in 2007, and discussion of The Journey of Gima Storna, a project that never became a film, but that nourished much of Fellini's work from the later 1960s on. Essays also address the importance of Carl Jung to Fellini's work, especially in light of the Book of Dreams and esotericism, of which Federico will be speaking in a little while. A major focal point of the book is Fellini's originality, in particular his revolutionary film language in relationship to both characters and viewers' subjectivities. It was no accident that he made major strides in this direction in the 1960s, a decade dedicated to the expansion and transformation of consciousness. That originality gave rise, of course, to the term Fellini-esque, which applies not just to film technique, but to its effects. Several authors focus on the phenomenological impact of Fellini's work, its intensity, visceral power, liquidity, disruptiveness, and eccentricity in the root sense of the word, pushing the work outward, never collapsing inward on itself. All of this was linked to his desire to express and provoke the sense of wonder that was so important to him. And then if we can, the next image would be the open structures, not the marriage agency image, but the, so Amy Huff-Dugdale, who is with us this evening, made this compilation of images, which shows us Fellini's fascination with structures that you see through rather than get stuck watching, and that propels the imagination beyond. And also, of course, his fascination with the sea, its movement, its continual changing, which was so important to so many of his films. Several authors reveal how much Fellini's films have to say in terms of crucial contemporary issues. Shailene Green, who is also with us this evening, links Fellini's work to colonialism and issues of whiteness. and what she calls the post-colonial imaginary of Fellini, or in broader terms, his relationship to otherness, a crucial issue today in terms of globalization and immigration. The image that I'd like to look at now is what I will call it the Asian traveler. And I think we've skipped over the marriage agency. That's the one that we don't want. Fantastic, thank you. This is an image from one of Fellini's dreams. And within it, he is, and we can see him in the front, he's an airport authority figure who has a responsibility of deciding whether this Asian traveler will be allowed into the country or not. Within the dream, Fellini remained paralyzed, but he spoke about this dream throughout his life with extraordinary shame for his inability within the dream to accommodate otherness. So this was an issue that was extremely important throughout his career. One of our essays illustrates the sensitivity of even Fellini's earliest works to the effects of industrialization and petroculture on the environment. Anya O'Healy, who is with us this evening, talks of making sense in the classroom, though not without some effort, of a film such as Nights of Cabiria in terms of students' immersion in a contemporary landscape of irony, pastiche, and bricolage. Margie and I do something of the same in our introduction, linking Fellini's love for the fragment to digital culture and fragmentary spectatorship. The book offers reconsiderations of politics and gender, particularly in relationship to parody and caricature, and Fellini's unsettling of gender distinctions and all fixed distinctions, which also has implications in terms of sexual orientation. The emphasis is not so much on what Fellini represents as what he unrepresents and disrepresents. Although the entire process of preparing the book was filled with wonderful surprises, there were two in particular that stand out. First, the enormous personal impact that Fellini had on people, the community of love that surrounded his work and relationships. This is reflected in the forward preface and opening section of the book, as well as in several of the testimonials. And here we have an image that reflects Fellini's loving relationship to those in his world. Fellini and his best friend Vincenzo Mallica frequently had lunch together with Vincenzo's wife, Rosa Maria, and their daughter, Caterina. And Caterina would refuse to eat lunch unless Rosa Maria would tell her or recount to her a fairy tale. So every time she did, Fellini would illustrate it on the fly. And Vincenzo ended up with a great collection of illustrated fairy tales by Fellini. The other great surprise was the extent of Fellini's global reach. Margie was particularly adept at uncovering people from all far reaches of the universe who could speak to his importance to their cultures. We never expected the section receptions, appropriations, dispersions to be so encompassing. Beyond Europe and the US, we were able to gather commentaries on Fellini's influence in Canada, South Asia, Turkey, Algiers, Russia, Japan, and Cuba. We could have provided even more had space allowed. We end the book with a list of archival sources for those wishing to come back from the desert islands and immerse themselves in the wonderful collections of Fellini materials available in Rimini, Switzerland, the US, and Turkey. So that is my snapshot of our book. I thank everybody again for being here, and I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say.
Thank you so much, Frank. I just want to very quickly ask, I want to make sure that we're back on speaker view, since there was a comment in the chat section that we were in grid view for at least the beginning of the presentation. In the meantime, please allow me to introduce Dr. Federico Pacchioni, Associate Professor of Italian Studies and holder of the Sebastian, Paul, and Marybelle Endowed Musco Chair at Chapman University. He directs the Italian Studies program, also leading multidisciplinary collaborations and community outreach initiatives. His research, teaching, and service are equally moved by the goal of unveiling, interpreting, and activating what is most significant and relevant in the cultural history and experience of Italy. He's the author of numerous publications, including books, peer-reviewed articles, translations, reviews, interviews, and creative writings. His books include Inspiring Fellini, Literary Collaborations Behind the Scenes, La Paura dell'Amore, Pier Paolo Pasolini, Prospettive Americane, A History of Italian Cinema, and L'immagine del burattino, Percorsi fra teatro, letteratura e cinema. So please welcome Federico Pacchioni.
Grazie Alessandro for the introduction, and mille grazie to the Italian Cultural Institute in Los Angeles for hosting this meeting. It was a pleasure contributing to this new volume showing behind me, which is really bound to be a crucial reference on the study of Federico Fellini for many years to come, because of wealth of topics and originality of scholarship. In the next 10-15 minutes, I will attempt to briefly outline the main points of my longer chapter on Fellini's relationship to the more unorthodox areas of spirituality. Through my research on this unique artist, I became increasingly aware of the predominance of esoteric themes in his work, but also of the significant degree in which such interests were shared by the community of artists and advisors with whom he collaborated. Federico Fellini's interest in paranormal and mediumistic phenomena has received very little critical attention. This is the gap that I tried to fill in my study. Moved by the objective of clarifying the special nature of Fellini's esotericism, which interestingly coexist with comedic and ironic tones. I will illustrate how this dynamic plays out with 3 examples. The first one is La Strada, that won the inaugural Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film in 1957. The film stages a delightful and tragic exploitation story between the traveling artist Zampano, played by Anthony Quinn, and his young apprentice Gelsomina, played by Giulietta Masina. Fellini wrote this script with playwright Tullio Pinelli, his lifelong and chief screenwriter. Both artists shared leanings toward the fantastic and the magical. Not everyone might know that Pinelli's own and independent literary work is typical of metaphysical Catholic theater, where representation is challenged by the attempt to stage the psychological and metaphysical complexities of human reality, often through allegories. From the beginning of their work on La Strada, Fellini and Pinelli sought ways to underscore Gelsomina's psychic nature, her empathy for animals and plants, her ability to predict the weather, etc. The memorable to a feast at the farmhouse when Gelsomina is taken by a group of children to the unsettling half-lit room where a child is kept in isolation underscores the theme of mediumship. Gelsomina is attracted by a creature who is, like her, considered different, and like her can see the unseen. Fellini's direction of this sequence generates an otherworldly atmosphere of suspense, conveying a sense of mystery and awe for the child's unique nature. It is likely that the blending of Pinelli's Christian religiosity with Fellini's looser form of spirituality played an important role in the creation of films that were able to reach a wide audience in the Italy of the 1950s and 1960s. La Strada certainly expresses a special blend of esotericism and Christianity, as well as of tragic and comedic tones. Furthermore, La Strada's memorable soundtrack is a perfect illustration of Nino Rota's harmonic tonal music, bespeaking an anti-modernist candor that was also part of Fellini's sensibility, a longing for a nucleus of metaphysical coherence. Not everyone might know that Nino Rota, who worked on Fellini's most important films, was a fervent student of occult matters and a collector of alchemical texts. Fellini warmly nicknamed him l'amico magico, the magical friend, and offered an indirect caricature of him with the lunatic oboe player in his last film, The Voice of the Moon, La Voce della Luna, who accidentally stumbles upon a musical interval traditionally known as Diabolus in Musica, a sinister dissonance that in the film evokes ghosts and invisible forces. The second example that we can consider is Juliet of the Spirits, about 10 years after La Strada. Again, starring Giulietta Masina in the role of a middle-aged and middle-class wife who discovers that her husband is having an affair and who undergoes a profound psychological crisis. In ways reminiscent of 8½, the spectator is taken directly into the mental turmoil of Giulietta as her life is assailed by a barrage of idiosyncratic characters. It is not always clear if these hunting figures are real people, memories, or actual ghosts. However, Juliet's psychic odyssey leads her not only to a greater emotional independence and self-dignity, but also, surprisingly, to an esoteric initiation, whereby in the film's finale, she is granted access to a new domain of the spirit, populated by benign voices ready to guide her through a new metaphysical space that is beautifully rendered with the suspended atmosphere of a Tyrrhenian pineta, such as the scene as you see behind me. The subject matter of this film and the coexistence of philosophic investigation and comedic nature brings us to shed light on another figure of Fellini's esoteric community, Ernst Bernhard. Bernhard was a German psychoanalyst and scholar who blended Jungian theories, mystical Eastern traditions, and a Kabbalistic vision of the universe. In addition to introducing Fellini to the I Ching, an ancient divination tool that the director quickly embraced and used to seek guidance at challenging times in his career, Bernhard acquainted him with the practice of the illustrated dream journal. The director became very fond of keeping an oniric journal, eventually filling at least 2 large notebooks. Today, the Book of Dreams represents a rich source for understanding Fellini's life and work. For example, the death of Bernhard, while Fellini was filming Juliet of the Spirits in 1965, is connected with a series of dreams which also relate to Fellini's desire and need to balance his comedic spirit with a psychoanalytic insight. In one dream, we see a large and daunting volume containing all of Jung's doctrines, while as we read, Bernhard advises Fellini that the doctrinal aspect is not proportionate to the light fantasy of the while in another dream, Bernhard changes, metabolized by Fellini's satirical mind, into a clown-like guru figure. And the last example that I would like to bring is Fellini's never realized, wondrous, and troubled screenplay, The Voyage of G. Mastorna, a project about a journey in the afterlife that he continued to return to for the remainder of his life. This time, the role of mentor was taken on by Gustavo Adolfo Roll, the famous seer from Turin, for whom Fellini developed a profound reverence and whom he began perceiving as an arbiter of significant professional choices, especially when it came to his decision on the fate of Mastorna. Roll stands as a sort of protective and authoritarian taxi driver, as Fellini pictures him in one of the pages of his dream journal. In a note accompanying the typescript of Mastorna, Fellini listed as one of the key motivations to his continued interest in the project, and I quote him, the desire to address critically or with an ambiguous adherence psychic phenomena, spiritualism, magic, rituals, and superstitions. Indeed, this film project serves as a vivid illustration of Fellini's complex and ambivalent fascination towards esotericism. Fellini's afterlife functions as a clear and cruel mirror of earthly life, where people's fears and desires are magnified and thus rendered more apparent. The limbic space in which the cello player G. Mastorna finds himself after dying in an airplane crash is controlled by a carefully designed educational system as spirit doctors, guides, professors, clerks, and guards assist the dead through a personalized journey. As you can imagine, this pedagogic experience is filled with absurd and comedic twists as the sanguine and stubborn Mastorna resists them with all his might. As he approaches the climax of his journey, Mastorna is taken to the head of a mountain pass, where a new voyage must now begin. After having spent part of the night in a shack, embraced by a sensual female spirit guide, Mastorna awakes and leaves on a mysterious path. In the very last scene, we suddenly read of Mastorna strolling through Florence on an early morning in spring, ecstatic at the spectacle of life, and entering a concert hall where he abandoned himself to the music of his cello, accompanied by the grandeur of an orchestra. Clearly, the director's demystifying bent is a consequence of his faithfulness to the wisdom contained in the plainest, most simple and earthly aspects of life, where the inebriating possibilities of the spirit world are reconfigured within human standards. To conclude, Fellini's long-lasting collaborations with Nino Rota and Tullio Pinelli, and his intense relationships with figures such as Ernst Bernhard and Gustavo Adolfo Roll, help in tracing the flourishing of what he once termed his voluptuous openness to everything. Fellini's adherence to esoteric matters is at the root of his talent for expressing spiritual mystery in his cinema, creating an atmosphere that blends memorably with Christian modes of storytelling in films such as La Strada, and that continues to find expression in a multiplicity of projects covering a wide array of spiritual experiences, including The Voyage of G. Mastorna. What makes the theme of esotericism in Fellini so unique is this filmmaker's comedic penchant and acute awareness of the subtleties of artistic representation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Federico. Originally, we had also plans to invite Frank to speak about his chapter in the book. And since we have the time for it, Frank, if you'd like to say some words about your own chapter, please jump in before we take things over to Thomas.
All right, if we have time, I will subject you to my to my thoughts and voice again. Yeah, my essay is called Fellini Remixed, Anglo-American Film and Television Appropriations. And it appears in the section Receptions, Appropriations, and Dispersions. I begin by talking about the extraordinary influence Fellini's films had in Anglo-American film culture. And people from Woody Allen to Todd Haynes and Martin Scorsese to Wes Anderson, et cetera. And the film most people think about in this context is 8½, but Eva Delony was also hugely important, leaving its imprint on a mini generation of American films that includes The Last Picture Show, American Graffiti, Mean Streets, The Wonders, and Diner. In my essay, I talk about 4 different appropriations of Fellini. The REM Everybody Hurts music video, which was directed by Jake Scott, son of Ridley. French and Saunders' fabulous Franco e Sandro Fellini spoof. And episodes from the 1990s US TV series Northern Exposure and Third Rock from the Sun. I'll just focus on those last 2. I mean, one of the things I discovered, which was really fascinating, is that Fellini gets assimilated into critiques of American culture, so that it's not just citation. There's something, I think, much more interesting going on. The Northern Exposure episode was directed by Joan Tewksbury, who was a scriptwriter for Robert Altman. The series in general deals with outsiders living in and passing through a small Alaskan town. It can be read as a broad updating of issues implicit in the settling of America. Euro-Americans emigrate to the far Northwest and settle in a world of Native Americans where they dominate, though not as viciously as their European forebears. The title of the series suggests not true discovery of the Northland, but a distance view, the exposure offered from the windowed security and comfort of a house or home. Exposure is not immersion, and it even implies a fear of contagion. Moreover, Northern Exposure identifies the show with the perspective of the Euro-Americans, not the world of Native Americans who become what is exposed. This speaks to a multicultural conservatism that the series does not idly mirror, but critiques. The conservatism is beautifully expressed in the Korean War vet Maurice's NASA suit, a bubble that allows Americans to travel anywhere in the world or in space, but always bring their own environment with them. And just a beautiful, I think, sort of metaphor for American tourists. Within this context, I'm American, by the way, even though I'm in Canada now, I'm also American. Within this context, one of the town residents, Ed, is an aspiring filmmaker who discovers in a fish he's caught a ring supposedly given by Giulietta Canamori to Fellini, and this triggers a host of Fellini-esque visions on his part. However, the otherness represented by Fellini comes to be seen as a threat, as threatening to Ed, a form of madness, and must be rejected by the episode's end, representing the broader issue of cultural closure on the part of the town and its inhabitants. So there's a very strong, a use of Fellini to make a very strong critique about the problem of otherness in Northern exposure. Third Rock from the Sun deals with aliens landed in a small Midwest American town to study the ways of Earthlings. In so doing, it reprises the theme of otherness that we see in Northern exposure with apparently an even greater cultural divide, this time on the level of species. The crisis of this episode is provided by the fact that the aliens, becoming ever more human, begin to dream, and they're perplexed by the experience. Sally, the second in command, has a Fellini-esque dream that references the black and white cinematography and costuming of La Dolce Vita in 8½, and various scenes and relationships from the former. Its musical score derives from La Strada. Capturing the male insecurity central to Fellini's film, Sally becomes gigantic, able to munch Eve-like on the earth in one absurd moment, and then shoot Don, her overmatched partner in life and in dream, who is turned into a chicken. But in sharp contrast to Northern exposure, Fellini plays an important role, Fellini in quotes, plays an important role in the negotiation of difference. As Fellini's dream helps her work, as Sally's dream helps her work out a crisis that derives from her species difference from Don. She's embarrassed him with her supernatural powers in her waking life, and the dream makes her reflect on the potential consequences of her enormous species advantage over him. When she awakens, she rejoices in the fact that she's not actually killed him and can continue the relationship. Don turning into a chicken highlights yet again the issue of species difference. And though Sally comically renounces species crossing in her dream, I could never give myself to poultry, she is able to transcend any such prejudice in her waking relationship with a boyfriend who's not only human, but also, as we have seen in various episodes, pretty much a chicken. It was intriguing to see the way in which Fellini functions in these two episodes, not just as some superficial influence on the level of style, or a citation fodder for the pretentious, but rather as a figure who gets imported into a different culture as an instrument of that culture's self-critique.
Thank you so much, Frank. I'd now like to welcome Thomas Harrison, professor in the UCLA Department of Italian, where he teaches Italian film at the graduate and undergraduate levels and courses in modern and contemporary literature. He's the author of the soon-to-be-published Of Bridges, a Poetic and Philosophical Account. He also researches poetry, intellectual history, and the comparative arts.
Thank you, Alex. Thank all of you and all of you who are tuning in. I wanted to be very brief and give an appreciation of Fellini, so to speak. He deserves it after 100 years, and I thought I'd start with the title that we chose, and try to explain also his international appeal. I'll let him speak largely in his own words, and if we have time, I'll give you some of his images. First of all, Fellini at 100, master of imaginative synthesis. I'd like to take issue with that title, even though it was mine and everybody enthusiastically endorsed it. I'd like to say that Fellini is not a master of synthesis, but a master of the detail. Synthesis we think of as 1 + 2 + 3 + 4. Detail instead is when you focus on a single, ideally concrete, eloquent picture or episode. And I think that's what Fellini excels in. Think about, for instance, Saraghina in 8½, or the figure of Gelsomina that Federico Pacchioni referred to. Fellini's subjects are archetypical figures, archetypical situations in life. The appeal of the diva in Dolce Vita, the filmmaker in crisis, 8½, the adolescent and sexual initiation, Amarcord, the circus, the mythological figures of, quote, father, mother, teacher, and priest in Italian culture. All of this can be summed up in the word Fellini-esque. When we say Fellini-esque, we mean all of those things. We mean something extraordinary and striking, something fantastic, almost surreal, something bizarre, magical, flamboyant, appealingly sensual almost always, but bordering on the grotesque, appealing in the way that the circus does, something mysterious on the border between fantasy and reality. These images speak for themselves. In fact, motion pictures, in the primordial sense, is the art of letting those images move in front of your eyes. And yet, there is a type of synthesis after all, a different type of synthesis in his films. It's not the synthesis of reason, of a well-ordered plot, or of organized, transparent meaning, or of moral judgment. Take, for instance, his reasons that he expresses for having chosen Marcello Mastroianni for the role of Guido in 8½. Originally, the choice was to have been Laurence Olivier. And on Laurence Olivier, says Fellini in an interview with Oriana Fallaci, says it was an Englishman, a baron, a great actor. Mastroianni, by contrast, I quote, is so elusive, discreet, simpatico, antipatico, sensitive, domineering. All this at once. You see, all that amalgam of contradictory qualities Mastroianni had, and therefore he was appropriate. The lineage of Fellini's art is town fairs and circus, which consist in an entertainment of chaotic episodes. His art expresses great exuberance, opulence, explosions of comic chaos. He also says that it is okay to take the complexes of the artist as the subject matter. Un artista è fatto di complessi. An artist is made up of complexes. And complexes means that there's all sorts of inner contradictions, which he thought it was okay to bring on the screen. The impenetrable mystery that is creation is what he once said he wanted to express on the screen. That mystery was touched on by Professor Pacchioni in talking about Gelsomina in La Strada, Zampano in the same film. You can't explain them. You can't explain exactly what they're all about. Michelangelo Antonioni, great director of the same time, said of Fellini's films, they show an excess of reality, an extraordinary wealth of characters, gestures, visions, and sights that are elaborated to the point of surreality. Fellini, he writes, is able, quote, to coerce reality, to transfigure it in an entirely personal way. This results in a dazzling remaking of reality, a twisting of things, visual, sonorous, emotive, and intellectual, into extraordinary and fantastic proportions. What about the appeal of Fellini? Why is he so extraordinarily loved among all directors, I dare say world directors? What is it about this kind of cinema? When we talk about the appeal, we talk about the audience. And I would like to say, and I throw it out there, I'm being provocative a second time, that if it weren't for his name Fellini, we might not love him so much. Because the word Fellini, the name Fellini, as opposed to, I don't know, Pasolini or so, has got something to it. It's euphonious. It's got the feline inside it, but it's plural. And there's something about the cultural identity of Italy that he conveys in his cinema that appeal to the outside world. And so what is that? I believe it has to do with Italian exuberance. It has to do, and remember we're in post-war years where the Italians are a source of wonder really for the world. Exuberance, but also their manner of dealing with chaos. The appeal of spectacle in Italy, the full use that they make of the visual and the acoustic, and their presenting of spectacle as without rhyme or reason. It doesn't need a true rhyme or reason spectacle. Cinema, said Fellini, sounded the voice of the siren of infinite seduction. So, the siren and infinite seduction. This cinema, his, the way he conceives it, amounts to a mode of understanding, a type of understanding which is neither prosaic nor philosophical. It makes sense, if you like, because it does not. And here I'm reminded of, I think it was Tertullian or some early Christian who said, to explain why he believed in Christianity, he said, credo quia absurdum est. I believe because it's absurd. That absurdity that inducts and captivates belief is at work in Fellini's art. In a script he wrote after visiting Tulum in Mexico, some of you probably been there, it's near Playa del Carmen, he ran into a Mexican holy man, he writes about this, and he says of this figure that he presented himself as something, quote, between priest-like and buffoon-like. On Ingmar Bergman, who was his favorite director of the time, he said that Bergman dressed in, quote, a prophet's robe, but with a clown's hat on his head with tassels. The filmmaker, again I'm quoting him, is a mixture of magician and conjurer, prophet and clown, traveling salesman and preacher. The resulting cinematic performances of this kind of ambiguous and practically contradictory character are thus at once morally urgent and playful, self-parodic. They do not aim at picturing an everyday understanding of reality that precedes the film. On the contrary, understanding arises in and through the discovery of another reality, a type of counter-reality. And that's why the metaphors for Fellini's art are drawn from the world of clowns, parades, and the circus, but also, as Professor Pacchioni mentioned a few minutes ago, also from the world of depth psychology. Carl Jung was admired for Fellini for being a rare intellectual who found a meeting place between science and magic, between reason and fantasy, who allowed us to go through life abandoning ourselves to the lure of mystery with the comfort of knowing that it could be assimilated by reason. Cinema, Fellini-esque cinema, involves a similar ability to overcome the division between everyday facts and imagination. It means, I quote him, trying to put certain fantasies in order and telling people about them with some sort of precision, end quote. Well, the words order and precision in this statement are analogous to the science that Fellini mentions in reference to Jung, which means the necessary imposition of method on the magic of spiritual revelation. What's involved in Federico Fellini's art is never simply improvisation or spontaneous inspiration. He also sought to organize the fantasies, the stories, and the settings down to their most minute details. This, if you will, is the filmmaker's science. As for the filmmaker's subject matter, it remains the same as it was for the Swiss psychologist. A recognition of, quote, the eternal myth, man standing alone before the fascinating mystery of life in all its terror, its beauty, and its passion. Therefore, we reach, after going through the detail and this new type of synthesis, the paradox of creative confusion. Quote, I can find the resources I need only when I am plunged into obscurity and ignorance. One should use thought, he claims, as a point of departure for going beyond thought. That excess of reality points to the unreality at reality's border. I now go to, and I want to exemplify it, a point that Federico Pacchioni made, which is the comic. All of this adds up, in a sense, this irrational synthesis that favors the detail adds up to comedy, which makes everything topsy-turvy. And I wanted to just give you a 1-minute clip from Amarcord. Let me see if I can share the screen real easily here. And play from the start. Amarcord, so we're talking about details, but also synthesis, has a wonderful episode in which Fellini shows you the typical teachers of his time and of his youth. So this one is the art historian, Then we have the one who's teaching science. I think he's a historian, but he too is a historian. And here's one of the most famous ones, which was the mathematician. Apparently people who grew up in Rimini remember her. And now we have the philosopher. And here we come to the teacher of Greek. I want to play this for you. And I want you to see the love that Fellini shows to his characters, especially the teacher, who's a really good guy. You'll see that this guy loves his subject matter. He even loves the boy that's in front of him. And he's actually quite slow in picking up on the fact that everyone else finds him comic and are making fun of him.
Eptanekron garpesonton. Usemar psamen posin. Keilio ienimen fones. Bella la lingua greca, vero?
Ostia.
Come musicale, eh? Emar psamen. Ripeti.
Mar psa.
No. Silenzio. State un po' zitti voi altri. Coraggio, ripeti.
Professore, può essere così gentile?
Dimmi, caro, che vuoi?
Scusi, me lo potrebbe far risentire?
Certo. Guarda. Emar psamen. Fai attenzione alla lingua. Deve battere qui contro il palato, così. E poi cacciala fuori. Emar psamen. Coraggio.
Mar psa.
No.
Silenzio. Dai.
Dunque, coraggio, su.
Mar psa. Ha sentito? È difficile il greco. Come la metteva la lingua?
Non così fuori, tra i denti.
Così.
Dai, Ovo, che ci sei vicino.
Questo è giusto. Emar.
Quasi riuscito, però.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that was a fantastic clip to share with all of us. And I am now going to ask everyone to jump in with questions. I know we have a couple already, but please use the Q&A box if you have anything that you wanted to ask. I am going to start with a colleague of mine, Tita Rosenthal from USC. And her question is, what was the reception of the film Et la nave va? She's asking because she was in the film, chosen by Fellini himself as one of the women in the kitchen scenes in the bowels of the ship. And Fellini never knew that he was not Italian. So being one of the women in certain scenes, she had the wonderful opportunity to watch Fellini direct and to be part of the whole experience of being on a Fellini set, and just wanted to know how the film was received in its own time.
Okay, I'm one of the chapters in the book talks about the Italian reception of all Fellini's films, and I don't recall exactly what it said about Et la nave va, but my sense of things, just because there was somebody made a comment that by 1983, while Fellini's reputation was at its peak, he'd lost his audience, and Et la nave va came out, I think, in 1983. And so the problem was not so much that the film wasn't well received, it's that Fellini had sort of peaked and declined. I love the film, I think it's brilliant, and I think he thought it was a real comeback film for him after City of Women was met with so much, well, a very mixed response with a lot of anger. But the film itself, something had changed within audiences by the 1980s for Fellini, particularly by the mid-1980s. So the film was not really well received. I think Fellini lovers thought it was a really good film, one of his best later films. But it really didn't grab anybody's attention. I think it won it won Italian awards, but it wasn't nominated for any American awards or whatever. So it kind of slipped through the cracks. That's my memory of it. In Italy, what happens is you get into the later 80s and Fellini becomes no longer are they criticizing Fellini's films, they're building him into a monument. because they see he's getting older, he's getting at the end of his career, and both the French and the Italians turn him into a monument of cinematic culture. So anything he does is okay. But that had not yet happened, as I recall, by the early 1980s. So I loved it. I think it's just an unbelievable film.
We also
if I can add something as well. Well, the film strikes as quite a more intellectualized version of Fellini's creativity, and sometimes it can hit the spectator as a cold film in comparison to the others. In reality, it is an extremely heartfelt film because and the ship sails on. It's a ritual of mourning for a loss of cinema, in my view. There is a parallel with the death of a certain type of cinema, of 20th century cinema, that is at the heart of that film, and is paralleled by the funeral of an opera singer. And so this, the end of opera is also a way to talk about the end of cinema. And so when we think in terms of the reception of the film, we definitely need to consider the film's connection to the time when it was released, and this time when the Italian TV was really exploding and entering into competition with cinema in ways that it had never done before, and Fellini was really on the forefront of that battle against TV in some ways, or for a certain kind of TV for sure. And so it is a film that is strongly connected to what was happening at the time in the media scene in Italy, and we definitely want to keep that in mind. It's wonderful to hear that one of the extras is present in the audience. That's really interesting.
So before we move on to the next question, I just want to ask everyone out there watching this, we're getting questions in the Q&A box, which is what we've been monitoring, but we're also getting questions in the chat. And I know that that may seem confusing, but I'm trying to go back and forth so that I can get things that are coming in through the chat. But if you can, it would be ideal to have the questions come in through the Q&A box that should be on the bottom of your Zoom screen, just to make sure that I don't miss anything, because there's a lot going on in the chat as a result of us needing to switch over to speaker view. Okay, so let's move over to Leonardo Lupori, who is interested in hearing the experts' opinions on the topic of gender identity. Fellini explores the concept of anima animus from Jung in his movies, and in his opinion, Guido from 8½, and Giulietta in Giulietta degli Spiriti embody the masculine and feminine aspects of Fellini, to which aspects Fellini both equally connected. So Fellini anticipated the conversation on gender identity. What do you think? So I open that to anyone to answer.
I don't want to hog. So if anybody else has something to say, please jump in. I've been thinking about this a lot in the past few days. And it strikes me that certainly with 8½, and Juliet of the Spirits, Fellini was very influenced by Jung and by the kind of binarism of Jung's anima and anima, seeing that there was sort of a gender differentiation within the psyche and within the male psyche as opposed to the female psyche. It seems to me that later in his career, he moves away from that a bit. One of the interesting things to me about Fellini is that there are no scenes of heterosexual intimacy in his entire cinematic career. The most intimate scenes we see are the lovemaking between Encolpio and Ascilto in Satyricon, and then later in the film between Encolpio, Ascilto, and a young woman who was pretty much by the end of the scene moved to the side. But Fellini expresses sexual intimacy through same-sex relationships in Satyricon. And it also seems to me that by the very end of his career, he saw gendering itself as a problem. In other words, and I find this in his commercials, which are really interesting because several of them are created as dreams. And the characters in the dreams immediately run to gender assumptions, which are not necessarily what Fellini is presenting on the screen. I'll just give one example. One of the, it's called The Cantina. It's one of the Banca di Roma commercials. At the beginning, I think Fellini's criticizing the main character, who is Paolo Villaggio, Fantozzi. And he criticizes him as a figure within the film for, there's this woman who's, it has extraordinary energy, and she's moving with, she's got a bucket in her hands, and she's moving to a space that leads out of the cantina. And so I think that she's a liberating figure, potentially a liberating figure, but that Fellini presents the character as seeing her only as a beautiful woman and relating to her as a little, he's wearing a little sailor's outfit, and he's like in his 40s or 50s or whatever. And so I think later in Fellini's career, Fellini began to see that the instantaneous gendering of relationships was problematic. So I think he moves from a fairly static view of gender at the time of Juliet and Spirits and 8½ to a much more dynamic view, an expanded view in which gender itself can become a kind of trap. So that's just this is totally me. I have no, I mean, I think I could argue it in terms of certain images and scenes and so forth and so on, but this is totally my response to, my own response to the question.
Does anyone else want to jump in?
Well, one element that we can keep in mind when thinking of gender in Fellini is the representation of the woman that we often identify Fellini cinema with, this extremely sensual body, which is, though it is kind of misleading, because one of the qualities of Fellini's cinema is the honesty and the sincerity of the subjective perspective. And being the perspective that of a male Fellini, and the closeness that he has to the production of his own films, the conceptualization of his own films, often what we see, the woman that we see is really the woman that belongs to the male fantasy. And therefore, Fellini cinema is like an investigation, an exploration of male fantasy, but it is an exploration entirely aware of itself. So that, I think, is something that often we forget when we focus on those overly sensual figures of women in Fellini cinema, that those are really the phantoms of the male fantasy world. And the films know that, and they are really looking at the pitfalls and the complexities psychologically and politically as well of that representation. And then I also want to point anyone interested in this topic to the film The City of Women, La Città delle Donne, that is really an anthology of these type of fantasies, and quite a bitter journey through the male erotic fantasy. So check that out if you're interested. It's really a summation of what Fellini has to say on that topic.
Okay, we have a question from Taher Gawad. Mastroianni is one of Fellini's most frequent collaborators. How did Fellini meet Mastroianni, and what qualities did he possess that prompted Fellini to continuously work with him throughout his incredible career? And what was their relationship like on and off set?
Okay, they met because Mastroianni and Giulietta did theater work together. So Fellini actually met Mastroianni through Giulietta Messina. The second question, what did he describe? He very often described Mastroianni as having no qualities, that was his greatest advantage, was that he was pliable. And that he didn't bring a strong actor's persona to his movies. He brought an openness that Fellini could work with. And their relationship was extremely close. On and off. They worked extremely well together. They really were very much in tune with each other during the making of their movies, and they were very close apart from the movies as well.
We have a two-parter from Mido Taha. My wife is a cinephile, but somehow has never seen a single Fellini film and would like to start. I've lived with his movies all my life, so I wouldn't know how to answer this myself, but what would you say that Fellini's body of work has periods? And if so, which film or period would you suggest we start with?
Well, Fellini's films can be prescribed as medicine, so we will have to know really in detail the patient in question to prescribe the exact film. But definitely, you can definitely see different periods in his filmography, and actually, that's one of the most exciting aspects of Fellini's cinema, is to see the evolution of his creativity across the decades, because and it is. All of the films are one long film, and it's a celebration of cinema, a celebration of creativity, a celebration of life, all evolving. But I would suggest to begin maybe with La Strada for the more neorealist, still inspired cinema, and then include 8½ for this transition to the more experimental, we'll say, briefly experimental, more subjective type of cinema. At that point, one could screen mature moments of evolution in that new phase by screening Amarcord. That is really a journey into the collective mind of Italy, and in particular the fascist Italy. And then it becomes complex, because at that point Fellini's cinema becomes increasingly rarefied, and so at that point I would perhaps suggest Ginger and Fred, because it helps to understand why also Fellini's cinema is changing in connection with the media scene. Some of the things we said before about TV, and probably that would be a good start.
Does anyone want to add to that? Okay, we have a question about Il Bidone. This is from Kate. The question is, it's a film that she finds extraordinary, but is not mentioned much. Does anyone want to speak about it?
Yeah, I'm actually doing the audio commentary for the Criterion version of Il Bidone that will be out this summer as part of the box set. So the problem was there are several stages to it. Fellini, the film is over 2.5 hours long, and Fellini had to cut it down to much less than that for the Venice Film Festival. So there was a good deal of sort of cutting that went on at the last minute, and some people have attributed their not liking the film to that. I actually don't think that's an issue. I think it's an extremely harsh film for Italy at the time, because it shows people dressed up as priests digging up junk jewelry and swindling poor farm people. And it's a film who are also complicit in wanting a quick score. It's a film that's very, very harsh within Italy. And what's interesting about it is 3 years later, the Commedia all'Italiana really took off. And those films were harsh as well, but they also have more of a comic undertone to them. So I don't think the audience was ready for the harshness of Il Bidone. I don't think it was so much a matter of editing. But the next stage, the next thing that happened is the film got cut by about 25, 30 minutes. And it was released internationally, particularly in English versions, in a really butchered state. It was only in the 2000s that footage has been restored. And the Criterion version, there's two English versions. One is the British Film Institute, and the other is Eureka, Masters of Cinema, that have all the footage. And then the Criterion version will have all the footage, but also cleaned up by the Cineteca di Bologna. So I think it's time to really reconsider Il Bidone. I think it's an absolutely brilliant and wonderful film, but there were a lot of things about its production, about the moment in which it was released, about expectations after La Strada, etc., that interfered with audience response to the film. And I do think it's a wonderful film.
Okay, I'm going to take two more, and this first one should hopefully have some interesting insights from a few of us. It's a question about how the thoughts you might have about the differences between the ways that Italians view a Fellini film and the ways that Americans do. Some of the images and situations he depicts, even those that may seem somewhat absurd to viewers in the States, have a certain familiarity in everyday life in Italy. Lina, who wrote the question, said that she's always sensed that it makes for a different experience of his films. So I open that up for your comments.
Well, I could tackle that a little bit since I talked about audience response. It seems to me that his reception in Italy is very, very different from the one in the States. So that things that might even fall flat in Italy are very effective here, and somewhat vice versa. Lina Wertmueller is an example, although more egregious example, if you like, of a director whose strategies come across very well in the United States and somewhat less well in Italy. So that certain things that might seem exotic here don't there. And I think that the American audience is different even from the French audience, from the German audience. The issue becomes very, very complex, which is why I went back to what is it that one expects from an Italian director that Fellini gives, that maybe somebody like Antonioni does not. Despite his absolute brilliance, Antonioni is giving a type of Italy that is not already part of the American imaginary in the 50s and the 60s. Whereas Fellini's giving that opulence and joie de vivre and let it all hang out that really comes across well here. I think, Frank, you can confirm or deny that Fellini won more Oscar awards than anybody, perhaps including Americans, which means that his audience was bigger here than even at home. And those films, some of those late films that both Frank and Federico mentioned, Ginger and Fred and so on, in Italy were considered, you know, semi-disasters. So yeah, I think that his most loving audience is American.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there's a sense, even in Italy, that Fellini's international reputation is based on the fact that he won Oscars, not that he won an Italian audience over or those other international audiences, but that he created his fame in Hollywood, in effect. I mean, I think that's an exaggeration, but it is a perception.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he won many awards also in Italy, but certainly in America he had an incredible success. And in fact, the of the best foreign language film at the Academy started with La Strada, so that's quite significant. Yeah, it's a really wonderful question because it takes us also to realize that there is an industry, a reality that relates to the industry of the art cinema. The art house cinema in Italy is produced largely with an international audience in mind, and vastly an American audience. So as Fellini came into his maturity, he increasingly thought of an international audience, I believe, as his main point of reference. However, the films go very, very deep into the folds of the national identity of Italy.
Okay, I'm going to ask Wendy Horowitz to join us as a panelist. And Wendy, I'm going to promote you over and you'll be able to ask your question and turn on your video. So this will just take a moment. And I should say that Wendy actually introduced me to Margie and we did a panel together at the Los Angeles Public Library. So I'm very excited to have her join us momentarily as a panelist to convey something that she felt was important on Marguerite's behalf. So, Wendy, you are on our end. I'm going to ask you to turn on your video if you're willing to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Alex. Oh, okay. So I'll just jump right in. Hi, everyone. I'm the photo archivist for the Los Angeles Public Library. My name is Wendy Horowitz, and we celebrated Fellini's 100th birthday exactly 1 year ago with Alex Ago. Thank you, Shalene Green, if you're out there, for introducing me to Marguerite. The reason this came about was because the Cineteca di Rimini was working with a photographer, Ivan Cerullo, and Patinate Star to present his series of photographs, Federico Fellini Faces, in Los Angeles. So we also made it an event for his centenary and invited Alex and Marguerite and other panelists, a translator, Roberto Croci, to help us celebrate. Now, after that, Marguerite and I became friends. And we were planning to have a wonderful book launch for the Wiley Companion at the Los Angeles Public Library Central Library. Through our emails, she asked a question of me that I would love to be able to share with you. And I'll read it to you. This came from an email she sent me last November. I casually suggested to my co-editors, Frank Burke and Marita Gubareva, a few weeks back, that we should do a special issue of a journal on Tonino Guerra, whose centenary is also in 2020. He worked with all the great Italian directors of the second half of the 20th century, and 5 screenplays with Fellini, a number of which were nominated for Oscars. He was, of course, a great and close friend of Fellini's, and since it is the centenary of both of them, I was wondering whether you had any ideas about how the two of them might be celebrated together.
I don't have any ideas, but I want to say that no one would be more in favor of it than I. I have immense respect. Federico Pacchioni would be too, for sure, because I have enormous respect and love for Tonino Guerra. I know his widow, and I think that it's way high time for him to be celebrated too.
Actually, we are doing a special issue for the Journal of Italian, and Federico's involved in this, and Amy Hof-Dugdale, and we're doing a special issue for the Journal of Italian Cinema and Media Studies on Tonino Guerra. And in conjunction with that, we should have a lot of new material, and it'll be wonderful to present it. That probably won't come out until 2021 because of all the delays with COVID. But at any rate, we're on it, and anything we can do to contribute to a public event, you know, I think that would be absolutely terrific.
May I just say to you all that the Los Angeles Public Library would love to celebrate when you're ready. We will have a big event at Central Library for you.
Okay, all right, that's very exciting.
Wonderful, that's great to hear.
Thank you, Wendy. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. You too. Thank you very much.
So that of course leaves us with some homework to prepare some additional public programs, but we also, of course, will be collaborating again to do some more events to honor Fellini Centennial. So I'd like to welcome back the director of the Italian Cultural Institute, Valeria Rumori, to conclude the evening for us.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you so much, Wendy, for your precious contribution. And we'd be delighted and honored to be part of it too, of course, as we did last year, exactly 1 year ago. So I hope you all enjoyed up there this fascinating and enlightening conversation about the maestro on the occasion of the Fellini 100 celebrations. And we invite you to stay tuned on our to follow us on our social media, and to stay tuned to our also website for our online events and webinars. And again, I would like to really warmly thank all of you for all the participants for their precious contribution. Professor Alessandro Ago also for his wonderful job moderating as usual. And Professor Frank Burke, it's quite late there, so we appreciate even more your your conversation and your contribution, Professor Thomas Harrison, and of course, Professor Federico Pacchioni. So thank you so much, and please stay tuned to the Italian Cultural Institute in Los Angeles for more upcoming events online. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.